Long before the mansion existed, the mountains were already there. They rose slowly from the earth, shaped by centuries of wind, rain, and silence. Their slopes were uneven, stubborn, and resistant to change. In 1881, they remained largely untouched, difficult to cross, and unforgiving to those who underestimated them. Travelers who passed through the region often spoke of an unsettling stillness. Sound behaved differently there. Voices did not carry far. Footsteps seemed to disappear into the ground. Even time itself felt altered, stretched thin by isolation. At the highest point of a narrow mountain road stood a mansion. It did not announce itself from afar. There were no towers piercing the sky, no bright stone reflecting sunlight. Instead, the house appeared gradually, emerging from the fog like a thought that refused to be ignored. Its walls were thick, built to endure cold winters and long silences. The windows were tall and narrow, their glass often clouded by mist. From a distance, the mansion seemed abandoned. Only when night fell did small signs of life appear. A faint glow behind a curtain, the suggestion of movement within. People in the villages below rarely mentioned the house. When they did, their tone changed. Some believed the mansion was once full of joy, laughter echoing through its halls during gatherings long forgotten. Others claimed it had never known happiness at all, that sorrow had been woven into its foundation from the beginning. But everyone agreed on one thing: the house remembered more than it revealed. The road leading to it was steep and narrow, carved directly into the mountainside. Horses grew restless as they climbed. Wagons creaked under the strain. Many turned back before reaching the summit, claiming the path felt wrong, as though it resisted being used. Isolation was not an accident. It was intentional. In 1881, isolation meant safety. Distance from gossip, distance from judgment, distance from lives that did not allow mistakes. The mansion stood above the world, watching quietly. Eleanor Whitmore had lived in the mansion for most of her life. She had been a child when her family first arrived, too young to question why her father had chosen such a remote place to settle. By the time she was old enough to ask, the decision had already shaped her existence. Her father had died 3 winters earlier. His absence lingered in the house, in the study he once occupied, in the chair no one else sat in the way certain doors remained closed without explanation. Eleanor inherited everything: the land, the mansion, and the responsibility of maintaining a name that demanded respect. At 27, Eleanor existed in an uncomfortable space. Too old to be considered young, too unmarried to be considered secure, too independent to be considered safe. Each morning, she walked the corridors slowly, her footsteps echoing against the wooden floors. The house responded to her presence, creaking softly, as if acknowledging her role as its sole guardian. She dressed simply, spoke carefully, observed more than she revealed. From the outside, Eleanor Whitmore appeared composed and restrained. Inside, she carried a quiet exhaustion. She had once imagined another life, one filled with noise, unpredictability, and freedom. But dreams had a way of fading when faced with obligation. Over time, she learned to accept stillness as permanence. Or so she believed. The sound of wheels against stone broke the afternoon quiet. A carriage climbed the mountain road, moving slower with each turn. The horses hesitated, sensing unfamiliar territory. It had been years since a visitor arrived without notice. Eleanor watched from the window. When the carriage finally stopped, a man stepped down and adjusted his coat. He removed his gloves with deliberate care, as though rehearsing composure. Inside, she carried a quiet exhaustion. She had once imagined another life, one filled with noise, unpredictability, and freedom. But dreams had a way of fading when faced with obligation. Over time, she learned to accept stillness as permanence. Or so she believed. His name was Thomas Hale. He introduced himself politely, presenting a letter sealed with legal markings. His voice was steady, practiced. He spoke of property boundaries, documents left unresolved, matters tied to her father's estate. Eleanor listened closely. Everything he said was reasonable, and yet something felt incomplete. Thomas remained longer than expected. Meals were shared in quiet rooms. Conversations unfolded carefully, never crossing invisible boundaries. He spoke of cities, of industry, of a world Eleanor had only imagined. At night, Eleanor lay awake, replaying their conversations in her mind. What he had said, what he had avoided, what lingered in the spaces between words. In the mountains, silence was never empty. Affection arrived without ceremony, in shared glances, in unspoken understanding, in restraint that grew heavier with each passing day. They never touched. In 1881, restraint was not virtue, it was survival. Eleanor knew the danger of attachment. She had seen how easily reputations dissolved. Still, she could not deny what had changed within her. Love, she realized, did not always feel hopeful. Sometimes it felt like risk. Thomas had not come only for legal matters. Hidden within his visit was another purpose, something Eleanor's father had concealed, something valuable enough to justify deception. When Eleanor uncovered the truth, her reaction surprised her. She did not feel anger. She felt grief. Not for what was taken, but for what could never be honest again. Truth demanded resolution. Eleanor faced a choice that would define her future. To expose Thomas meant protection. To remain silent meant betrayal of self. The mansion waited. It had seen many such moments. The confession did not come suddenly. It arrived the way everything did in the mountains. Slowly, deliberately, and without spectacle. Night had settled around the mansion with unusual heaviness. The fog pressed against the windows, blurring the world beyond the glass until the house felt completely detached from everything else. Even the familiar outlines of the mountains had disappeared, swallowed by darkness. Inside, the mansion breathed quietly. The fire in the hearth had burned low, its warmth lingering more in memory than in flame. Shadows stretched across the walls, shifting gently with every movement of light. The silence was not uncomfortable, but it was expectant, as if the house itself sensed that something could no longer remain unspoken. Thomas stood near the window. Eleanor sat across from him, her hands folded carefully in her lap. She had learned long ago how to keep her body still when her thoughts refused to do the same. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Silence, in that moment, felt safer than truth. But silence had limits. Thomas exhaled slowly, as though steadying himself before crossing a threshold he could not return from. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower than usual, stripped of its earlier confidence. "There is something I need to tell you," he said. Eleanor did not respond immediately. She did not look at him. She already knew, or at least, she knew enough to understand that whatever he was about to say would confirm what she had sensed all along. Confessions rarely bring relief. They bring clarity. Thomas began carefully, choosing each word with visible restraint. He spoke of the documents, of the visit, of intentions that had never been entirely honest. He admitted what he had come seeking, and why he had believed the truth could remain buried without consequence. As he spoke, Eleanor felt something settle inside her. Not shock, not anger, recognition. The truth did not arrive as a blow. It arrived as weight, heavy, undeniable, and impossible to set down once acknowledged. She listened without interruption. That restraint, more than anything, unsettled Thomas. When he finished, the silence returned, thicker than before. The fire crackled softly, as though reminding them both that time was still moving forward, indifferent to human hesitation. Eleanor finally lifted her eyes. Her expression held no accusation, no triumph, only sadness. Thomas nodded, unable to defend himself. For the first time since his arrival, he seemed smaller, diminished not by judgment, but by his own realization. Love, Eleanor understood then, does not vanish in the presence of betrayal. It becomes complicated, and complication, she knew, was sometimes harder to endure than absence. Eleanor did not sleep that night. The mansion remained awake with her. She walked its corridors slowly, her footsteps echoing softly against the wooden floors. Each room felt like a witness. Each closed door seemed to hold a fragment of memory she had not yet fully examined. Outside, the fog thickened. The world beyond the mansion no longer existed in any meaningful way. There was only the house, the mountains, and the choice before her. Neither felt honest. The truth, she realized, did not demand punishment. It demanded clarity. When morning approached, pale light filtered through the windows, revealing a landscape washed clean by fog and cold air. The mountains emerged slowly, as though returning to their places after a long absence. Eleanor found Thomas waiting near the entrance. He did not ask for mercy. He did not ask for explanation. He already understood. Their final exchange was brief, restrained, and deliberate. Eleanor's voice did not waver as she told him he would leave that morning. The documents would remain. The lie would not follow him beyond the mountain road. Thomas accepted the decision without resistance. Some endings do not need argument. The carriage was prepared quietly. The horses shifted impatiently, sensing departure. Eleanor watched as Thomas stepped inside, his movements careful, composed, and irrevocable. As the carriage descended the narrow road, Eleanor remained still, watching until it disappeared into the mist. She felt no triumph, only certainty. The mansion closed behind her with a familiar sound, solid, final, and resolute. Inside, everything remained exactly as it had been. And yet nothing was the same.